series event. We're very excited about today. We're very excited about today, and we have a very special guest. But this is our first speaker series of many coming up. We've already booked four more, and I have a feeling we're going to have a total of close to 10 of these between now and the summer months. This is a benefit of membership of American Friends of Lafayette. And I know that there are sometimes people on these events that aren't members of the American Friends of Lafayette. And that's fine, but I'm asking you to please consider becoming a member of the American Friends of Lafayette at friendsoflafayette.org. Thank you very much. Tonight's guest is none other than Stephanie Dray. Stephanie is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today best-selling author of historical fiction. Her award-winning work has been translated into 8 languages and tops the list of most anticipated reads every year. Stephanie Dray has written books about Adrian Lafayette, Eliza Schuyler Hamilton, and many others. Our newest upcoming book is about Abigail Adams. It is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and your friend, Stephanie Dray. Stephanie? Bonnie, you got to unmute her and spotlight her.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for unmuting me. I see lots of faces that are familiar to me and lots of new faces. I wasn't sure if it was going to be the usual folks that already know all about me or all new folks. So I was going to sort of just launch into my new work. But I think because there's so many new people here, I'm going to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about my whole sordid writing relationship with the Marquis de Lafayette. Now, those of you who know me, you know I'm a historical fiction author, and I specialize in telling the American story through the eyes of women who lived it, shaped it, and occasionally shoved it forward when no one else would. Over the years, my novels included America's First Daughter, about Thomas Jefferson's eldest daughter, Patsy, My Dear Hamilton, about Eliza Schuyler Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton's wife, Ribbons of Scarlet, which is about the women of the French Revolution, and The Women of Chateau Lafayette, which is about 3 women united around the legacy of the chateau in Chavignac that was Lafayette's ancestral home. My books have taken readers from, revolution to revolution. And my newest book, which is going to be coming out in Mother's Day of this coming year, in time for the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, is going to be called A Founding Mother. And this one will be about Abigail Adams. And so we are going to talk a little bit about her relationship with Lafayette as well. Now, all of these books have some connective thread other than revolutions, and that is a very tall Frenchman named the Marquis de Lafayette, who continually hops into my books and steals all the scenes. And so, it's become such a tradition that Lafayette is going to appear in all of my work that I even made sure that I mentioned him in a book that was set in the 1930s, Becoming Madam Secretary, because I did know that that Frances Perkins, our first female cabinet secretary, she greatly admired Lafayette too. So I thought, why not throw him in there? Just keep the pattern going. So my Lafayette journey began in America's First Daughter because Lafayette and Jefferson had a friendship that was really written into the soul of the book. In America's First Daughter, Lafayette becomes fairly central to the world of Thomas Jefferson and his daughter Patsy when they are in France. Also, little known fact, Patsy would have thought of Lafayette as being the one who saved her family's life from the British, because he came into riding to save the day when her father was being chased during the war. Jefferson and Lafayette did share a profound ideological partnership and shared Enlightenment ideals. And we know that they worked together on the French declarations of the rights of man and citizen. But what we didn't know, at least until recently, was that Patsy Jefferson really served as her father's political gatekeeper, and she witnessed the depth of that connection, and she took inspiration from Lafayette. So much so that at Monticello, I was told she kept a portrait of Lafayette, probably in her little office room. And the last time I was there, it was actually hanging over her desk. Now, I don't know if that's where it always was kept, but it was a reminder that Lafayette was an inspiration to her because she met him when she was a young woman, and he encouraged her, and she saw him march into Paris when he was leading to the procession with it was sort of an unhappy procession, really, leading the king and queen from Versailles to eventually imprison them in the I think it was the Tuileries garden. But she saw him from an upstairs window, and he tipped his hat to her. And so she always kept that French cockade that she wore on that day, and was very sympathetic to the French Revolution because of that. My dear Hamilton, Lafayette was more of a contemporary to Eliza Hamilton. They were friends. So this is not just because Lafayette served with Alexander Hamilton under George Washington as a sort of de facto aide de camp, but also because he had met Eliza before she even knew Hamilton. He had come to Albany, and she was the daughter of General Schuyler. So she knew about this Frenchman very early on in his career. They were friends, and that was a friendship that endured, I'm going to say, almost 90 years until their deaths, because Eliza lived a very long time. She lived past Alexander Hamilton's death by duel. Spoiler, if you didn't know, Aaron Burr shot and killed him. But she would continue to correspond with Lafayette. And when Lafayette returned to the United States for his triumphal tour in 1824, he wanted Eliza Hamilton with him, and she did travel with him to West Point and other locales. And so that relationship was very close, and he buoyed her in a dark time. So that was sort of two women of the Revolution, two founding mothers that he had a connection to, and it wasn't a tangential connection. It was interesting enough for me to mine as an author, and to sort of keep in mind that he's really one of the only founding fathers I can think of, maybe the only one, who paid so much attention to the ladies. He was solicitous of them. He asked for their viewpoints. He honored them as equals. He made sure to include them in ceremonies. And that's something very special and unique about him. And I think it's what makes him such an important figure, especially when we're talking about the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and what it means to Americans, what it means when it says all men are created equal. Did that just mean men, or did it mean mankind? So those two books were not the only appearances of Lafayette. I also wrote Ribbons of Scarlet. This was a book about the women of the French Revolution. And you might be thinking that I would have included Adrienne Lafayette in this novel, because she certainly was a very prominent figure of the French Revolution. But my part in this book, which was a collaboration novel with other authors, was the figure of Sophie de Condorcet. She married a philosopher, and there is a rumor that she had a very serious crush on the Marquis de Lafayette. Now, there's no concrete proof of this, but of course, he was so considered so dashing at the time that I thought it was probably likely that she had at least a little smidge of a crush. So I sort of went with that theory without violating any of the history. So if you know my work, you know that I'll flirt with the line, but I won't cross over it. So I think you'll really enjoy Lafayette's portrayal in that book. I certainly did. as he sort of threads his way through the revolution from the eyes of different women in the revolution, they all view him very differently. Then came my novel, The Women of Chateau Lafayette, which is sort of the novel of my heart. And it took me about 7 years to write, all told, even though I was writing other books at the time. And to me, and I know I'm going to tell, I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again for new people because I think it will be fun. Um, when I first wanted to write this book, I wanted to write about Adrienne Lafayette. I thought she was an amazing woman, our forgotten French founding mother who never set foot on our soil, but nonetheless helped advance our cause. I thought she'd be extraordinary. She was so brave. And I pitched this to my agent at the time, who said, "You cannot write about her. In the first place, she's not American. In the second place, she wasn't a queen. And in the third place, she didn't even get her head cut off during the French Revolution. So this is a book that will never sell, and you can't write it." What they really wanted me to do was to write about World War II. And I was pretty frustrated because I had never written about World War II. My focus has always been during the Revolutionary era. And so I complained to a very good friend of mine named Kate Quinn, who some of you might know from the Alice Network and some of her other splashy. Her most recent book was The Briar Club. I told her, "Oh, well, if only I could think of a connection between Lafayette and the Nazis, I'd be all set and I could write a book that New York would be happy with." And we laughed about that darkly. And Kate encouraged me to do some more research. Maybe there was, some connection between Lafayette and the Nazis. I was pretty dubious, but historical fiction authors, we love to research and go down rabbit holes. And so I went home and I started doing some research. And that is when I learned that the chateau in Chavignac, Lafayette's ancestral home, had been used to hide Jewish children during the Holocaust. And I remember being very moved by this because I knew what this would mean to the Lafayettes, to know that their legacy of liberty and religious freedom and protecting people continued so long that their own house became a refuge for children. Then another weird coincidence occurred to me as I was researching. I had to know, how did this house become a sanctuary for children? And I learned that it had been purchased by a woman in World War I named Beatrice Chandler. And I remember thinking, Beatrice Chandler, why do I know that name? This is very familiar to me. And I looked at my bookshelf over my desk, and there was a book on that shelf by Beatrice Chandler. And I thought, well, it can't possibly be the same lady. But I took down the book, and it absolutely was the same lady. And she and I are kindred spirits. She is my writing genie. Beatrice Chandler was an American socialite and a heroine of World War I, a decorated war heroine of World War I, and a member of the American Friends of Lafayette, by the way. And she, when she found that Lafayette's ancestral home had fallen into disrepair, she purchased it to turn it into a refuge for children in World War I, probably little not knowing that this legacy would carry forward into the next war to serve as protection for these children. And now I knew that this home had been a place where Adrienne Lafayette showed enormous bravery, where Beatrice Chandler showed enormous courage and foresight and charity, and where an anonymous woman in World War II, whose name we don't know, but we know she was a school teacher living in the castle, was helping the French resistance and was helping hide children. The combination of these elements of stories just blew me away. And I knew now that I wasn't writing about a single woman. I was going to write about the Lafayette legacy, which I think is actually more beautiful because it's something that endures from generation to generation. and we pick up the torch. This group has carried the torch, no one more than Chuck and Bonnie, especially recently. And so that is a connection that we have with generations that came before us. And that is so touching and so moving to me that I was going to write that book if it took me 12 years. So I wrote the book, and I had to rewrite it 3 times because I kept discovering new things, like there really are secret tunnels and all sorts of, fun stuff that I had to go in the book. So if you've read The Women of Chateau Lafayette, you'll probably see how much my love comes through on the pages, and I hope you loved it too. But that was not the end of my relationship and writing about Lafayette, because my newest book about Abigail Adams, of course, here comes Lafayette as a character again. And this time he's in a much different role. And the reason for this is that the Adamses are older than a lot of the founders that we know. If we think of Madison and Jefferson and James Monroe and Lafayette, they were children next to John Adams and Abigail Adams, who were there at the start in Boston with the Sons of Liberty. So I got to see Lafayette from her eyes as a very promising young man. Right now, she met him when he came to Boston, and he was very solicitous of her. Told her what an honor it was to deliver letters from her husband John, because they had sort of traded places. Lafayette left his patriotic wife and daughter in France to come fight in the American Revolution here in America. Meanwhile, John Adams had been appointed to be an emissary to France. So he left his patriotic wife and daughter to go across the sea and attend the king and the counselors at Versailles. So he wasn't able to communicate very well with his wife and family while he was in France. He experienced some of the same difficulties that Lafayette did in the slowness of the mail, or letters getting stolen and printed in the press or sunk to the bottom of the sea. And so Abigail was really charmed and buoyed by Lafayette's reassurances and his presence and his delivering packages from John and letters. I knew that, and so the meeting that I decided to let them have was actually on the Admiral's flagship when he came into Boston after a terrible storm had damaged the ships. I want to say off the coast of Rhode Island. Now, Alan probably knows better than me, but the ships come in and they invite Abigail Adams to dine with the French officers. And we know that Lafayette was present at one of those dinners, but probably not both. He'd already gone off to fight somewhere else. And so this is where, as a historical author, I have to bend things without breaking them. So I wouldn't show both dinners. I would show one, and I would have them all there, even if they wouldn't all be there, because otherwise you have to repeat things, and then it's like Groundhog Day for the reader. So those are the sorts of historical choices that you make in historical fiction. So I had Abigail be quite charmed with Lafayette, as she was. The second meeting with Lafayette, there might have been some in between, but the next one of note is when Abigail eventually was asked to join John Adams in Europe. And she went to France. And if you've seen the John Adams HBO special, you know that she met Jefferson there and Ben Franklin. It was a very fun little vignette of all the people who were there. At the moment that she landed, Lafayette was actually back in America. He was visiting George Washington. And so Abigail didn't know this, but she rolls up to his house to pay call. And at the time, it was the Hotel de Noailles. So this is where he was with Adrienne Lafayette. They were still living there. And Abigail leaves her calling card for the lady. And this was the tradition. You'd be in your carriage, you'd ride up to a house of a notable that you wanted to visit. You would have your servant get out of the carriage, go to the door, and ask if the lady of the house was at home. And if she wanted to see you, if the lady of the house wanted to receive you, she would say that yes, she was at home and you could come in. But most of the time, the ladies were not at home. Even if they were actually upstairs at home, they would say, "We're not at home. You can leave your card." And so Abigail had just been, sprinkling her card all over Paris, trying to get to know the ladies. And she drives up to the Hotel de Noailles. I think it was her last stop. The servant gets out, and it's a very intimidating house with liveried servants, leaves the card. The lady's not at home, get back in the carriage, and they start to drive away when all of a sudden the servant comes running back out and bangs on the carriage door. Oh, he's so sorry, so sorry. The lady is actually at home, because when Adrian saw that it was Abigail Adams who had come calling, she interrupted her day. She was having a private day at home with her mother and sisters and grandmother. And so even though she was, she wasn't dressed for company, she was not going to turn Abigail Adams away. So she came out, and Abigail was surprised because Abigail is this stoic New Englander. And here is this lovely little French woman who throws her arms around Abigail's neck and hugs her and kisses her cheeks and makes a huge deal over her. And Abigail had been very unimpressed with French women to this point. Abigail did not like them. She thought they were rude and slovenly and very overexpressive. But something about Adrian just absolutely charmed her. She felt like they were intimate friends almost right away. And what's interesting about it is that Adrian Lafayette was closer in age to Abigail's daughter than she was to Abigail. So Abigail, they were friends, but she felt a sort of protectiveness over Adrian. Now, John Adams and Lafayette do not have a close friendship, at least none that I am aware of. And it's probably due to the fact that John is an elder statesman. He's very cynical about human nature. If you read his writings, he's pretty funny. He's pretty convinced that this whole democracy thing isn't going to work out, but he's working for it. But he says, all democracies commit suicide eventually. And then you have Lafayette, who's this effusive, idealistic Frenchman. So it's not terribly surprising that maybe they weren't besties, but they were friends, and they were contemporaries and colleagues, and he certainly respected Lafayette. Now, where this comes into play is that much later, when the Adamses go home and the French Revolution takes place, and then it takes a very dark turn, and Lafayette finds himself in prison, and his wife and his wife's family are under threat of guillotine, the Adams are very, very upset about this. Much more so, in fact, than Thomas Jefferson, who is supposedly Lafayette's good friend. The Adamses are appalled at what's happening in France, in part because they know that there's these young people that they cared about, the Lafayettes, and they're in danger of losing their lives. And not just them, but many other people who had been heroes in our revolution, like Rochambeau and Admiral, I want to say D'Estaing, but please forgive my pronunciation. I do not speak French. It's been a real weakness for me, especially loving Lafayette as I do, but you know who I'm talking about. So anyway, the Lafayettes are in serious danger, as are many other heroes of our revolution. And the Adamses cannot see the French Revolution as being a continuation of ours, because they think of it as a betrayal of their American friends. So, many years pass, and the Lafayettes are, of course, eventually spared through American efforts. And this is one of my favorite parts of the American story, is that in America, you have all sorts of parties factionalizing. And you've got the Federalists, and you've got the Democratic Republicans. And within the Federalist Party, you have like two sub-parties, because Alexander Hamilton and John Adams are supposedly in the same party, but they hate each other, probably even more than either of them dislike Jefferson. So there's a big political mess where everyone hates each other and they're killing each other in the press and they don't want to cooperate. But the one thing that they all agree on is that they want to help Lafayette. They all want this and they work together on this. And this is actually quite touching because many Americans, including our political leaders down to more average people, were really trying to help. And I don't want to give all the credit to Americans for, saving the Lafayettes, but they had a lot to do with it. And they did it by putting their differences aside. So that's something that Lafayette has always done in American history, is he's almost a talisman for helping to erase party differences. Everyone loves him. And maybe there's a lesson in that for us. Now, I don't want to talk forever because I know that people have questions and I sort of really prefer to do discussion with people, not just talk at them, even though it's a speaker series. But Chuck told me that this was more of like a cocktail hour on Friday. So I'm going to treat it that way. I think we should open it up for questions and then we can talk about after the questions, there will be some auctioning of books, not on this chat, but in email later. Okay.
Okay. Now, I do know that Marilyn Hoffman had something she wanted to say. Is Marilyn there tonight? And can we unmute the Hoffmans, please, Bonnie?
Good.
Yep.
Well, the funny thing was that Alan and I went to a book launch of a historical novel in Concord, New Hampshire, that is written by Laura Canoy, who some of you may recognize because she was the narrator, the voice of many of the travel stories. And she's written a book about Alsace-Lorraine in World War II. And the interviewer asked her at one point, "What is your favorite historical novel?" And Alan and I nearly jumped out of our chair because she said, "Oh, it's Stephanie Dray's The Women of Chateau Lafayette."
Oh, I love hearing that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
You
thank
know-
you for telling me
Thank
that.
you, Marilyn. That was great.
Do you know Laura?
I don't.
And she's
okay.
quite a celebrity in New Hampshire because she had an interview talk show on NPR for 20 years. So here, there was a lot of cheering for her. A lot of people know her. That the place was sold out. So that she loves your book best of all.
Yay.
Hi.
A couple things, Stephanie. Thank you very much for your talk, and I would agree with that author. Your book was terrific.
Oh, thank you.
And we were recently in France, and we had to go to the cemetery and see the grave, and very impressive. But the question I had actually was a historical one. He was a good friend. Lafayette was a good friend of Jefferson, as you
Yes.
said.
Mhm.
Is there anything in the literature or in the history of them discussing slavery? And some of the important things that I would think is, of talking with someone politically, that they may have been friends, but there must have been some political angst between them about some of these issues like slavery.
I love this question. There is a scene in America's First Daughter, which is based on a discussion they had, which is when Lafayette came back on his 1824 tour, he stopped at Monticello, and you probably know they had this, wonderful reunion. They ran to each other, they hugged each other. It was an extremely emotional reunion between them. But that did not stop Lafayette from making some comments while he was in Monticello about his discontent that slavery was not yet eradicated. He said it in front of some of the people who were enslaved on Jefferson's plantation, which he knew what he was doing. And those people gave us some accounts that Lafayette had said these things in front of them. So imagine what he was saying in private, right? when there was no one looking. He was not shy of making his opinions known on this. I think he probably gave Jefferson the benefit of the doubt that Jefferson was an opponent of slavery and meant well to get rid of it. But the fact that he kept harping on it while he's a guest in Jefferson's home tells you that he didn't give him that much credit. So, but their relationship survived intact. I think Lafayette knew how to be both firm in his opinions and about his ideals without creating enemies. At least in America, he seems to have made plenty of enemies in France. So yeah, I'm glad that you asked that. That's wonderful. That's true.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think he did less lecturing and more little acts of, to show people how he felt. I mean, I don't think he lectured people. I think he hugged James Lafayette in public, or he left the ball early to see Native Americans, or he treated women like, he just did those things and people watched him.
Well, that's a great point, Chuck. But I think too, though, that there's an unspoken lecture there, right?
Right.
It's loud when your name is Lafayette, but he doesn't have to, wag his finger in anybody's face, though he can actually take Jefferson to task in a carriage in front of his enslaved servants and make it part of a discussion because he's earned that right. What's Jefferson going to do? Tell him to shut up? We're not friends. Jefferson's going to sit there and he's going to take it.
Good point. All right. That was a great question. Thank you, John. Any other questions?
All right, I'm going to unmute Kathy. Kathy, I'm going to click the ask to unmute, and then at the top of you got it. Go ahead, Kathy. Oh, you know what? The Zoom's unmuted, but we're not picking up your mic. No worries. There's a little arrow by the audio, the little microphone, that maybe you can choose a different microphone. There you go.
And if it doesn't work, you can type your question into the chat, and I'll be happy to answer it that way.
All right.
And in the meantime, while we're figuring that out, I will tell everyone that the reason I may be like just a tiny bit rusty on Lafayette tonight is that I am finally writing a book where Lafayette does not appear. I am in the midst of writing a book that will be set in Italy in the 1930s. And I just got back from Italy. And I have not figured a way to put Lafayette into the book yet, but probably a mention of him will have to be made somewhere just for tradition's sake. So if any of you have recommendations about, how Lafayette can fit into a book about pasta and Mussolini, let me know.
All right, Stephanie, can you see that chat pane, or would you like me
I
to
sure
read?
can, yes. So
Okay,
the question
great.
is,
Thank you.
please talk about Lafayette's contribution to the success of the Americans in the Revolution. Was it mainly in support of Washington, or did he contribute to the military strategy? So there are others who will know far more about this than I do. I'm not a military historian, but from my vantage point of the research that I've done, I would say that Lafayette is instrumental to America winning the war. I do not think there would be a United States of America without the Marquis de Lafayette for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that the persuasion of his dramatic arrival in America, where he supposedly came against the wishes of his king and caused a sensation across Europe and in America, that's public relations. You need that to win a war. And Lafayette's either intentionally or unintentionally spawned a mythos at the age of 19 by running away to America. And, there's all these sort of stories, like maybe he had to dress as a lady to escape, and there's all kinds of stuff. I don't know which parts of those are true, but it all adds to the legend, right? About this young man who's chivalrous and who is going to aid the cause of freedom across the sea. This lays the groundwork for the eventual support, monetary support, that the French will send to the United States in helping us survive fighting against Britain, the finest fighting force in the world. So by the time the French are talking about sending money, guns, ships, all that sort of stuff, Lafayette's legend has already laid the groundwork for it. But additionally, he returned to France. He left the fighting in America. I want to say, no, I'm not gonna guess a date. I am too rusty for that. But he leaves the war. He goes back on leave to France. He's under house arrest for a short time because he disobeyed the king. But by this time, the king, everybody in France loves him. He's the hero, the French hero in the American War. And he helps persuade ministers, people of power, to give aid and comfort to the Americans. And he does return with, if you've seen the Hamilton musical, when he returns, there's more French resources available. I think the song's called Guns and Ships or something like that. So without all of those resources, the United States does not prevail. George Washington's military strategies could not have succeeded. Then there's the little bit about Yorktown. Who cornered Cornwallis at Yorktown? It was the boy, the young Lafayette, who Cornwallis did not think much of, had cornered him there and was able to write back to George Washington and basically say, hey, this is a great place for us to mount, to make a move. And there was some debate about whether or not they should go to Yorktown or whether or not they should fight elsewhere. Ultimately, they went to Yorktown, and you know the rest of the story. So certainly, I would never take away from Washington's contributions or say that, Lafayette somehow overshadowed Washington. I don't think that's true. But he was an essential person in this endeavor, in my opinion. It does not happen without this young man. And what's more is that Lafayette isn't just a foundational figure of the American Revolution. He's a foundational figure of the French Revolution and countless other revolutions that were spawned because of it, including ones in Haiti. So you have someone who's actually one of the most important people to be alive during this time period. He changed the shape of Western civilization, not all by himself, but he is a continuous thread. And so the era that we all grew up in, where democracy was ascendant, we can attribute that to the Marquis de Lafayette. He may not have been the best at battle. We don't know. There's lots of things that he may not have done well, but what he did do better than anybody else was inspire people and get things in motion. Now, there's a biography of him, and I'm forgetting the name of the biographer, but she makes a wonderful point about him, that he does a lot of things that fail, sometimes miserably, but he tried more things than other men, ever. I'm sorry, he failed at more things than other men ever tried. And so that meant that sometimes he succeeded, and those successes were glorious and led to the world as we have known it. So to me, Lafayette is a larger world figure than George Washington ever was.
Ooh, I love that. He failed at more things than he tried.
That's not original to me. That was
right. Maybe that was Laura. All right, we have Lloyd Kramer. Lloyd, I am going to flash that blue button.
Okay. Am I now audible?
Hi,
You're
Lloyd.
on.
How are you?
Hi, Stephanie. I want to make two comments and then ask you a question. The first comment is I was in California in the summer, and my sister-in-law was reading a book called Becoming Madam Secretary.
Ah, yes, yes.
And she said, "Oh, I'm reading this great fictional story of Frances Perkins and what a great woman she was." And she was going on, and she said, "There's this writer named Stephanie Dray. Have you ever heard of her?" I said, "Oh my gosh, she's an expert on Lafayette and his women friends." So, see, you never know where your name may come up. There it was, California.
Thank you. I love that. Tell her
Yes,
hi for me.
I will. I'll tell her I actually got to talk to you. I mean, that'll raise my in-law status. Secondly, I want to make a suggestion about your book on Italy.
Oh, yes, I'm open. Tell me.
So, the most important woman in Lafayette's life in the last 2 years, apart from his daughters, was Cristina Belgiojoso, who was from Italy. Do you know the story of Lafayette's relation with Cristina?
No, the last lady I know about for him is Frances Wright.
Well, Cristina Belgiojoso fled from Italy because of the repression of the Austrian government. She went to France as a political exile, a young woman. She became a writer in sort of liberal nationalist circles in France, and Lafayette befriended her because he liked her articles and he met her through mutual friends. And she became a great admirer of Lafayette and his support for the cause of Italian independence. And during the Revolution of 1849, she was back in Italy working with the movement to free Italy from foreign control. So she represents a tradition of, let's call it, democratic, nationalist, liberal aspirations that are the alternative to fascism in Italy. And
This is
she
perfect.
is part of Lafayette's legacy. I think you should do some research on her and bring her into that book some way, okay?
You know I will. If I can fit her in, she's going there. And I got to write down that I owe this to Lloyd.
Well, you can read a little about her in my own book about Lafayette in Two Worlds, but there are other things about her. And the third thing is more of a question.
Mhm.
You are writing really valuable historical fiction, but why did you decide to write fiction about historical figures rather than traditional historical works about the people who interest you? And what does fiction allow you to do
Yeah.
that humble historians can never achieve?
So I get this question a lot. And I should begin by saying that one of my writing partners in America's First Daughter and My Dear Hamilton is Laura Camoy. And she was a historian. She was a professor of American history at the U.S. Naval Academy. And she has written sort of straight historicals, not fiction. And the process is much the same. So I totally understand, like, well, why didn't you just write a scholarly tome? But I think of historical fiction as an art form in the first place. So I think of myself more as a craft. But also I think historical fiction does some things that biographies can't, or historians don't, or can't, because the historian has to tell you what happened, what we have evidence for, should not really speculate too much. Historical fiction is making a case, almost a legal argument, right? We take all the information that we get and we add some artistic flair to it to support an argument of a theory of what we think happened or might have happened. And we get the reader very invested. Their emotions are invested. Generally, people, I'm not saying that you can't feel anything reading a biography. Certainly I have, but that's not its primary purpose. Its primary purpose is educational. Primary purpose of historical fiction is to make the reader feel something and then go find out more. Also, historical fiction authors typically ask questions that historians don't. And we've come across this in a couple of ways that have been really exciting for me. For example, when we started writing America's First Daughter, there were no biographies about Patsy Jefferson. There are now, but there weren't at the time. And so we were kind of having to write our own biography so that then we could write the historical fiction about her. And I remember we went to Monticello and we asked lots of questions of the historian there, who was amazingly informed. But one of the questions that we asked was, okay, well, we're writing all these scenes with the Jeffersons. How did they celebrate Christmas? And she was really stumped because she said, no one has ever asked that before, in part because Jefferson has such a, an atypical relationship with religion. But also, a historian is not going day by day trying to recreate daily life in a scene, whereas a historical fiction author is. And so after that chat, the people at Monticello put together a whole website about how the Jeffersons celebrate Christmas. And we thought that was very, very fun and exciting. We're like, oh, we contributed something. Now, with the women of Chateau Lafayette, though, I got to actually contribute something, and that was about Beatrice Chandler. Now, when I first was starting the book about Beatrice Chandler, I thought I knew her story, that she was a woman whose marriage was in trouble before World War I, and then by the end of World War I, she stayed married to her husband, William Chandler, who is very famous for other non-Lafayette related reasons. Look him up. He's quite a character. And so I thought, oh, okay, I know this story. It's about a woman who, the war brings her and her husband closer together. So I wrote that. And then I discovered some papers at the New York Historical Society in 26 unsorted boxes of documents there. I stumbled across a bundle of love letters, and they were in code, and they looked like nothing. And if anybody else had picked up this bundle of letters, they wouldn't have known what it was because they didn't have the other half of the letters. But I did, because William Chandler, who is also a member of the American Friends of Lafayette, had given me some private correspondence that he had kept from his grandmother. I put the two letters together, the two halves, and suddenly I was able to decode this. And I realized that I had just discovered a 100-year-old secret love affair between Beatrice Chandler and a French officer at the front. I had to tell the family this, so that's always fun. They took it very well, though. They honestly did. But I thought, okay, so I know what this story should be. She falls in love with a Frenchman in the war. Something terrible must happen. And then she ends up back with her husband. Okay, a tragic love story. Great. I wrote that. And then just as the book was about to go to press, it was in the publisher's hands. I got a call from Bill Chandler saying, well, I have to tell you something. And that is that I have discovered that my grandmother was lying about her identity her entire life. And I know this because of the papers that you sent me from the New York Historical Society and questions that you had asked. You didn't know who certain people were on this tree. I did the genealogical research, and I found out that she's been lying on passports, on all sorts of things. I'm not going to tell you what the lie is. If you haven't read the book, you can read it and I won't spoil it for you. But suddenly I knew now I was telling a story of a woman who couldn't tell her own truth during her lifetime. And yes, biographies can certainly expose that, but it's such a tender thing to approach that it's really wonderful to be able to approach it in fiction, to get inside her head and her heart and show readers why she might be afraid to expose this. And so that was really fun because they changed the Wikipedia page about Beatrice because of my work. And so I was like, yay, I really did contribute something. And then there comes Frances Perkins. Now, Frances Perkins has a lot of amazing biographies about her because she was a very public person in terms of being our Secretary of Labor under FDR. There's so much information about her career that I don't even know how all the biographers approached it, but all of them accepted Frances Perkins's statements about her husband and how her marriage was really sort of more of a marriage of convenience. She told people that she got married to get it over with. And so the biographers sort of go with that because this is what Frances tells them, and they're interested in her larger legacy as a public figure. But as a historical fiction writer, I have to be delving into her intimate relationships. So to me, the most important things that I could get a hold of were her appointment books and her diaries and her personal letters. And in those personal letters, I found many love letters, tender love letters between her and her husband. And so this is not a marriage of convenience. They were obviously in love at some point. And so I get to approach and theorize about people's personal lives in a way that historical scholars often really can't do or shouldn't do. And I think that really does make a contribution to the historical record. And I'm really proud of what I do. I really love it. And I'm not sure I would be good as a biographer, but I really feel like my life's calling is writing historical fiction books, which bring the story to much broader audience. And I'm not going to deny that, historical fiction sells more copies than than history books. Maybe not if you're Ron Chernow, that he sells a lot of books, but even he would thank Lin-Manuel Miranda for that musical because he sold a lot more books after the historical fiction musical. So I also thank Lin-Manuel Miranda for doing that. And so that is why I'm a historical fiction author. Thank you.
Everybody that's on the Zoom tonight will get an email from us, and we're going to do a little silent auction for 3 signed books from Stephanie Dray. Number 1 would be, look at Bonnie. Look at you, girl. You're awesome, Bon. Becoming Madam Secretary. We have that one, and it's signed by Stephanie. The Woman of Chateau Lafayette.
Hardcover.
Hardcover. And then this is a series of short stories which Stephanie Dray has participated in. Is that right, Stephanie?
That's right. Mm-hmm. And this one does not have Lafayette in it. But it's about Queen Boudica, who was the woman who really gave heartburn to the Romans. And so I think you'll enjoy the story. I think Lafayette would have enjoyed her story.
Bonnie, will you let everybody, I want to see everybody at once real quick, and we can give Stephanie a big round of applause.
I know it'll be a quiet
Stephanie.
round.
Thank you very, very much.
That's really amazing.
I'm indebted. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate you. Hi to your husband, Adam, and just thank you for all you do. It's a wonderful way to learn. Historical fiction is a wonderful way to learn, and nobody does it better than you. Thank you, Stephanie.
You're very kind. I loved seeing everyone again, and I look forward to when we can all be together in person again soon.
It will happen,
yes.
I promise.
Bye-bye.
All right, Bonnie, let's bring up the next series. We'll talk about what we're doing next.
Okay.
Very exciting stuff.
All right. Yeah. Chuck, you've been hard at work. Hold on. I got out of order with my slides.
Sorry, Bon.
Just kidding.
Sorry, that's gonna cost me, ladies and gentlemen. I'm gonna be doing the dishes. Okay, so on December 3rd, we have Ryan Cole, the author of the new book, The Last Adieu, Lafayette's Triumphant Return, The Echoes of Revolution, and the Gratitude of the Republic. It's a brand new book, and Ryan Cole will be our speaker that night, and I'll be sending out Zoom information on this evening very shortly. This book came out literally about a month ago. Next, Bonnie. Mike Tidy. He is a gentleman that I know from Philadelphia. He has close ties with the Carpenters Hall, and he presents Secrets and Alliances, how the December 1775 Carpenter Hall meeting shaped Franco-American relations. It's a fascinating subject. It's not something we talk about a lot, and I'm excited to have Mike with us on Tuesday the 16th. Next, Bonnie. Okay, the new book that the American Friends of Lafayette have published from the Fairfield Symposium. We'll have Alan Hoffman, Lloyd Kramer, and Diane Shaw, who are all watching this Zoom as we speak. talk on Wednesday, January 7th, about Lafayette and enduring struggle for human rights and democratic government. So we're really excited to have our president with Alan, with Lloyd and Diane that night on the 7th of January. Next, Bonnie. Oh, our past president is going to be speaking to us, Robert Kraut, on January 21st at 7:30. And Robert's going to talk about the other tours that Lafayette did. His mini tour of the United States in 1784 and the tour of France he did in 1829. Two things we never talk about, and I'm really excited to have Robert Kraut on board. This is going to be great. The other thing I wanted to mention, we're in talks of many other people. I have Iris DeRode coming up in the spring. I have Paul Spalding who's going to talk to us about Lafayette being incarcerated in the spring. So we have a lot more speaker series to come. It's a great way to get together and enjoy some free fun and education. Bonnie, let's wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we're rookies at this. So what I'd like to do is at the end of this, I think we captured email addresses. To get to the Zoom, you had to log in with your email address. And so as an attendee, you have so I'm going to take those email addresses and I'm going to, from our Gmail account, I am going to just launch the auction online if you're interested. And it should be easy and it should happen in the next couple of days. And then we will be able to announce a winner. And this is just a nice thing that Stephanie has so generously suggested. And every all the proceeds after shipping go towards supporting the American Friends of Lafayette and speaker series and the things like that. So thank you so much, everybody.
Can we see everybody again? Say goodbye. Stephanie, once again, I want to say thank you so much. Bonnie, thank you so much. You're the best Zoom master in all the world. Thank you, Mr. President, for joining us today, Alan Hoffman. And I just want to say we'll see you soon. We'll see you on December 3rd at 7:30. And I want to wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving holiday. Viva Lafayette!